A young personal trainer is found dead in his New York City apartment, and the spotlight is now on his estranged husband, a male model and influencer. But here's the thing, he is in charge with the actual death of his husband. We are exploring the crime scene, the investigation, and a disturbing reported past, all with former FBI agent Bobby Chacon, who can give us an insight into what may be happening. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Personal trainer, aspiring doctor, 34-year-old Jacob Zieben-Hood was found not just dead, he was found brutally killed and his body slumped over on the toilet in his apartment in Harlem in New York City. According to Pix 11, prosecutors say Jacob sustained multiple stab wounds and was covered in blood. There was a laceration on his head, stab wounds to his leg that were so bad that you had one strike that was deep enough to go through the muscle. The New York Post reporting that police confirmed one of the wounds severed an artery, so he bled out. And as you can imagine, he was pronounced dead at the scene by authorities. Now, to be clear, the medical examiner has not officially released the cause of death. So now it becomes the question, who is suspected of doing this, right? Well, that is where Jacob's husband comes into the mix. 40-year-old male model, influencer, Donald Zieben-Hood. He was the one who actually called 911 to that apartment on West 138th Street. Now, what he apparently told dispatch was interesting. Reportedly said that he found Jacob dead on the toilet, that he himself was hurt, that he needed medical assistance also, that he was concerned that he would be arrested for violating a protection order, and that is a key part. Apparently, Donald was ordered by a court since last year to stay away from Jacob, but apparently he violated the terms of that order multiple times since it was put in place. So what happens when authorities arrive at the apartment? Well, Donald is reportedly sitting on the couch, claims that Jacob attacked him with a knife, and apparently he himself had cuts on his arms. In fact, he needed stitches. But here is where the story takes a different turn. According to prosecutors, earlier in the night, Jacob apparently phoned his father and accused Donald of chasing him with a knife and wouldn't let him leave. Jacob's father even reportedly confirmed that he heard Donald screaming in the background, calling his son derogatory names. This is according to court documents. The New York Post reported that Jacob even sent his father a picture of his wounded leg. So Donald is now facing charges of burglary, criminal contempt, this is for violating or allegedly violating the protection orders, and weapons possession. However, what did I not mention? No murder, no manslaughter. There's no charges yet for Donald directly in connection with the death of Jacob. This is an ongoing investigation. And when we have an ongoing investigation, and as we get into a few more details about the couple's background, who better to discuss this than retired FBI agent, attorney Bobby Chacon. Bobby, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
So what are they looking at right now to determine whether homicide charges, murder, manslaughter, whether homicide charges could be brought?
Well, they're waiting really for the medical examiner's report. As soon as the medical examiner determines the cause of death to be homicide, then they've got a homicide case on their hands. Then the DA's office has the necessary legal paperwork, so to speak, to then file those charges. I'm sure those charges are coming, but it's just a matter of getting the paperwork straight. Not to be glib, but this is no great mystery what happened here. And so I think they're just waiting. They file those initial charges to take him into custody. And then I have no doubt that homicide, some level of murder charges, will result once all of the medical examiner's work is done. Sometimes that takes a couple of days. And so that's probably what they're waiting on. And once they get that and they review that, then they'll likely file those charges.
You say there's no great mystery, but couldn't it have been if it was clear what happened in that apartment? If it was clear as day that Donald stabbed Jacob to death, they would have arrested him. They wouldn't have to wait for an autopsy report per se. I mean, because the question becomes, was he acting in self-defense? And was there a period of time from the argument to when Jacob is found dead, right? So if it's true that he calls his father and talks about that he's being chased, takes a picture of his leg, sends it to his father, maybe they have an argument, maybe they disperse, they don't talk. Donald goes to sleep. That's what he allegedly says. He says he went to sleep, wakes up, finds Jacob on the toilet. If there was that period of time, maybe it's not so clear cut. Maybe that's why he hasn't been charged as of yet with any homicide related charges.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I don't know. I agree. I look at it like this. We're reading a book and we've got 15 chapters and we've read 14 of them already through the court documents. And we're waiting for the 15th chapter, to be officially finished so we can read it. This is a relationship that had a long history of domestic violence. As you said, there was an order, not one order of protection, but multiple orders of protection. In this case, multiple violations of those orders of protection by the perpetrator in this case. A history of violence, both by the family of the victim telling us that and the neighbors telling us that. And so this is the story is pretty clear of this relationship. It was a violent relationship. There were multiple assaults during the course of the relationship. What we see in these cases, of these domestic violence cases, is that there's an escalation. It keeps escalating and escalating and escalating until one of the people winds up murdered. And so I think that's what we have here. He could claim self-defense. He could claim, look, this was one of our fights. It just went too far this time. And I was defending myself and I wound up inflicting a wound that was fatal to my husband. Now, he might claim that. That his defense could very well claim that. But that's going to be a claim at a trial, hopefully for some type of murder charge, because in all of this domestic violence, he was the perpetrator in this case, the one under arrest, was the aggressor. So he's the one that had the order of protection against him. So this wasn't a tit for tat. This wasn't a back and forth. This was one person being aggressive towards the other. This was one person, the victim, telling people, yeah, he's going to hurt me. So this wasn't like an equal fight. This wasn't a fair fight between two people that ended up one getting the better of the other. This was one person being the aggressor continually throughout their relationship, as documented in many domestic violence. I think there were 9 or so domestic violence calls on this, and then through the orders of protection. So I think that it's clear that who the aggressor was. It's clear that who was, the one responsible for the escalation of the violence. And ultimately it ended in this. He says, we had a fight. We went to bed, and then I woke up at 4 a.m. and he's on the toilet and he's dead. If you want to make that your defense to a jury, have at it. But I don't think that's going to prevail.
Really, really upsetting story that we're covering here in New York City. And we wanted to bring this one to you. We wanted to break it down. And the reason we can do that is because we get amazing support from our sponsors like Upside. And if you don't know what it is, Upside is great. It is a free app that gets you cash back when you buy daily essentials. So I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. Go to a convenience store, I can get Upside. Why not get cash back when I do all these things, right? This is real, actual cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen. But make sure to use our promo code Sidebar because you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Before we get into the past, how much can the autopsy, the degree of the wounds, the directionality, how much can that tell about what happened? If we're talking about self-defense or not, how much can the wounds, how much can the autopsy tell a piece of the story?
Well, they can tell, you're right, they can tell a big piece of the story. If they're not so brutal that you lose track of the different wounds. Sometimes, depending on the knife used and the viciousness of the attack, you get lost. Some of the wounds get lost because it's so macerated. The skin is so macerated. It's so brutally shredded. But if you can get the clear sequence of cuts, and what the fatal cut was, whether, like as you mentioned, to his leg, he might have hit the femoral artery and bled out. So you can kind of, it's for a good medical examiner, New York City has the best. You can kind of tell the story through the wounds. So they'll both probably have defensive wounds, because in a fight like this, and even when someone's defending themselves of an attack, sometimes they cause an offensive wound by striking back at the person almost in defense. So it's called an offensive wound, but it's almost like they're defending themselves, trying to fight back, and they cause an offensive wound on the person that's coming at them. So those kind of things, the medical examiner will hopefully have enough clear wounds to kind of go back and forth. They've already, when they took him into custody, the perpetrator in this case, they've photographed all his wounds. So the medical examiner doesn't get access to examine a live person, but they've taken video and photographs of his wounds, and then they'll match it to the wounds of the victims to see the back and forth of this case. Now, unfortunately, the narrative of the fight we only get from one side. We only get from the survivor. And that may not be always the truth. You can actually put a lot of weight in the fact that his version of the story puts him in the best light, because that's what humans do, and that's certainly what a defendant would do. And so you have to take his side of the story with a grain of salt, make sure that anything he says matches up with the physical evidence, the physical wounds and stuff. But you should be able to hopefully be able to put the wounds on him through the video and the photographs against the wounds on the victim from the medical examiner, and then take his story as a starting point and kind of build. And you also have the physical. You may have blood spatter at the scene, so that tells a story. If you cut a major artery, you usually have pulsing blood, so that's the spatter. So that might tell part of the story. So all of that stuff takes time to examine and to look at, and they're probably doing that right now.
And what about the fact that he was found on the toilet?
Yeah, they're going to have to, and I'm sure you can, if there's enough blood, you can tell whether if he was dragged there and kind of propped up there, or if he kind of retreated. The bathroom's often a safe haven. I mean, we saw that in the Oscar Pistorius case. Sometimes, they retreat to the bathroom. The victim of domestic violence retreats to the bathroom because kind of a safe haven almost. You shut the door and you lock yourself in there. And it's also where you keep some, supplies for wounds, bandages, Band-Aid, whatever you think. That's usually the place you keep that stuff. So he may have retreated into the bathroom and kind of, maybe he locked the door. Maybe his husband opened the door after or whatever. But the bathroom is kind of a place where normally you would retreat to care for your wounds, or, to kind of seek safe haven.
The timeline's interesting too. I mean, we've been focusing upon that about, according to People in Pix 11, which referenced court documents, the couple allegedly gets into this fight at 7 p.m. the night before. I mentioned the phone call to Jacob's father. Jacob is found at 4 a.m. on the toilet. Again, Donald claims he fell asleep after the argument, wakes up, finds Jacob dead on the toilet. I agree with you. I think a lot of this does come down to the autopsy findings. When could we get those results back? Typically, I know it can be different for jurisdictions and for each investigation, but typically what should we expect from when we'll get an autopsy finding and a report from the medical examiner, or at least even a cause of death?
Yeah, I mean, cause of death will come quicker than the rest of the results. The toxicology, obviously, we all know, takes longer because it's a laboratory function. So yeah, I would imagine, and it also depends, medical examiner in Manhattan is probably one of the busiest in the world. So it all depends on their workload and things like that. There's many homicides that take place in Manhattan on any given day. And so I think that, but if all other things being equal, I think, in 3 to 5 to 7 to 8 days, you could get, that kind of results if they have the manpower and resources to do it. And then, obviously toxicology takes longer, and certain other things take a little longer. But certainly, within, a week or two, you should have everything you need.
I think the fact that he hasn't been charged with any homicide-related charges is interesting from an investigative point of view, because do they put pressure on him now for more information by, I don't want to use the word threatening, but saying, hey, listen, if you're not truthful with us, we're waiting for more information. You could be charged with murder or manslaughter. Tell us what you know right now. But also, they can't cross the line. They can't be coercive to get a confession of some sort. But I have to say, the fact that he's not initially charged with this, does that give law enforcement, does that give prosecutors any way to put pressure on him to provide more information?
I mean, it could, and that's a negotiation not between him, but certainly between the prosecutor's office and his attorney. As I imagine, he's represented by an attorney, and so that attorney, again, Manhattan criminal defense attorneys are some of the best in the world as well, and so that attorney will, most likely be feeling out the prosecution on, is there something we can do, as far as future charges go, that but no matter what the future charges are, that attorney is going to be able to, bargain them down. Normally, you sometimes see, murder 2 bargain down to manslaughter 1 and things like that. And so it depends on the strength of the evidence. So no deal is going to be made really until all of the information from the medical examiner comes in, because, they don't know what to charge him based on the strength of the medical examiner's, results. And then the defense isn't going to show its hand until they know what the medical examiner has said. And so there's this there's probably a very subtle feeling out between the defense counsel and the prosecutor's office. And then also, you also always have that dynamic, which I was always involved in, is the kind of negotiations, if you will, between the detectives or the investigators and the prosecutors. We always felt we could move on charges quicker than they did. Of course, they're the ones that have to stand up in court and defend those charges, or, pursue those charges. And so we always felt we always got to that point a little sooner. Prosecution always wants more. They want enough evidence. They want overwhelming evidence before they stand up in court. And I get that, because, I don't have to stand up in court and represent the people. So, so there may be that. There may be the detectives say, we have enough. And the prosecutor said, no, we want a little more. Well, let's wait until, we've got him in custody. There's no rush, in other words. They've got him in custody on these other charges. He's hopefully not going anywhere, because that's a whole nother part of this story where he kept getting let out on bond to do more violence.
Well, can we talk about that? Can we talk
Sure.
about that a little bit? So I have to talk about what this couple had been going through. According to NBC4 in New York, Jacob and Donald had a history of domestic violence for years. A few months ago, authorities say Donald violated the protection order that was in place when he allegedly threatened Jacob with a knife, charged with menacing and criminal contempt. He was charged with strangulation for another incident that allegedly happened inside the apartment where Jacob died. According to Us Weekly, another time, police showed up after this alleged fight between the two, and Jacob was found bleeding from a cut to his forehead. They told police that Jacob just hit his head. And in fact, Us Weekly claims that Donald has been involved in 9 domestic incident reports since 2022. So, Bobby, how does that all factor into this investigation? And by the way, whatever he ends up going to trial on, could all of that be used at trial?
Yeah, well, first, sure. I mean, we see this escalating violence taking place, and we see, I hate to call them typical hallmarks of a domestic violence victim. You get another injury and they say, oh, I fell. How many times do we see in the cases of a husband and wife or battered wife syndrome? Oh, I fell on the doorknob or whatever. And that's why that's all what led to mandatory reporting on emergency rooms, and doctors have to mandatorily report when certain incidents, no matter what the victim says, because they'll often cover for their abuser. And so that seems to be might have been what would happen with Jacob in this last event that you highlighted, that he said he fell, when there's a long history of domestic violence. Now, it's one of those things where he keeps getting let out. He keeps violating these orders of protection, and then is still allowed to get let out. And we've seen this in a lot of domestic violence cases where it keeps escalating, and the system just keeps letting it happen. And then ultimately it winds up in the death of the victim.
According to Us Weekly, that cited the New York Post, Donald was granted $5,000 bail on one occasion when prosecutors were asking for $20,000. How do you explain that?
I explain it as a very lenient system. I mean, look at all of the systems in, all of the different states and all different cities. Probably New York City probably has one of the leanest for victims. We've heard the no bail crowd, and all of these things that have been happening in New York City. They're very lenient on criminals, and so you keep letting these people out. I think even $20,000 bail for someone of this stature is probably. I think in some of these instances you have to the system has to change, where if you have a certain number of domestic violence incidents against you, convictions or pleads, you don't get bail. We have to straighten this out, because you're going to wind up killing this person, and we've seen it too often. Just keep ignoring, to keep letting these violent domestic abusers escalate their behavior and keep letting them out. Orders of protection are pieces of paper. They don't mean anything. They don't protect. This can't protect you. It's not, the person, if they show a willingness to violate an order of protection, which in this case Donald did, he's violated them before. What good is another order of protection against him going to be? So I think that there's certain thresholds. If you violate an order of protection, you don't get another order of protection. You don't get out until we settle all these charges. You shouldn't have pending cases of domestic violence and be out on bail if you've already violated an order of protection, because you've already shown the system that piece of paper doesn't mean anything to me. I'm going to go over there and abuse that victim again. That order of protection does not faze me. And so once you establish that, what good is another order of protection going to do? It's going to lead ultimately to a victim getting killed.
It's like you read my notes. My question to you was going to be, is an order of protection just meaningless? Is it just a piece of paper? Now, I do want to ask you this. So reportedly, Donald is big on social media, an influencer with an Instagram account that has nearly 68,000 followers. He's done fashion shoots, runway shows. Does that factor into this in any way? I mean, even in a trial, I wonder if there's the question, does anybody know who he is? Does anybody follow him? But that kind of, not celebrity lifestyle, but obviously maybe more well-known. Does that factor into this in any way? I mean, either it's jury selection or something as part of the investigation?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it would. I mean, look, you're right. I do agree with you. I think it is a celebrity status. I mean, these are two very good-looking men enjoying this lifestyle. I mean, I saw some of the social media posts that they're on a boat and they're having these lavish vacations. They're living a life that is pretty envious. I mean, they're living in Manhattan, to me, the greatest city in the world. I mean, they're living the life, apparently, right? But behind the scenes, we know that was different. But I think that you will have people that kind of are enamored with these people, enamored with this lifestyle, so I think that would play into a trial. I'm not sure how much it plays into an investigation. I think as an investigator, you try to divorce yourself from who these people are, because we do get involved with celebrity investigations and things like that. Rich people are very wealthy, and you try to divorce yourself of that, because this is, this, I hate to say it, but this pattern, if it happens in, a condo in Manhattan or a trailer park in some rural area of the country, it's the same. It's a domestic violence situation of repeated abuse that escalates until it ends in the death of one of the parties. And so I think that, you have to divorce yourself of all the window dressing around that. But you're right. I think that when that comes into play later on, when you're trying to select a jury and when you're trying to kind of get people that are going to not look at the celebrity status of these people, not look at their social media and what a great life they think they had or they put out to the world that they had. And that's where I think it'll come into play if it goes that far.
Well, Donald Zieben-Hood is being held without bail. We will see if there is a change of circumstances, if there are additional charges that he could face, but we'll keep a careful eye on it. Bobby Chacon, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.